Hey, book club. I'm so excited to welcome Jessica Knoll, New York Times bestselling author of Luckiest Girl Alive and Bright Young Women. Her new novel, Helpless, is out today, and it's the kind of book that you just want to tear through and immediately want to talk about. So, early congratulations, Jessica, and thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Of course, I would love to start by just having you introduce Helpless in your own words and
hmm
maybe say a little bit about what the book is about.
Sure. So, Helpless centers on our main character, Faye Heron, as she returns to her college campus after 12 years to attend the funeral of her beloved film professor. And in the 12 years that have passed since she graduated, she's become a successful actress, writer, and director in Hollywood. And she is going to be running into her ex, Henry Spalding, for the first time since she graduated. And while they're there, they decide to bury the hatchet. It was a bad breakup, but they've moved on. They're both married. Henry has kids, and they kind of cheers to the past with a drink, which Henry has spiked. And Faye passes out and wakes up in Henry's secluded Adirondacks cabin. And as her week in captivity unfolds, she's trying to figure out why she is there. And a years long mystery begins to unfold that rewrites the past as she remembers it and makes her reconsider how things ended with Henry.
So, where did writing this book begin for you? Was it a relationship dynamic or
Mhm.
just a question you couldn't stop thinking about or something else with all of this?
Yeah, I'm very interested in revisiting the past when you feel that you've made strides and have grown since, and you think you don't recognize the person you were. And you go back to an environment where you feel like you're coming in as a whole different person, only to discover that maybe not that much has changed, not as much as you would have liked to have changed has changed. I find that to be a really satisfying character arc to kind of confront um, things about yourself that perhaps you haven't been brave enough to look straight in the eye. And by the end of this novel, Faye and Henry both do that.
Yeah, you've described Helpless as a spiritual successor to Luckiest Girl Alive. What made you realize that these books were maybe in conversation with each other?
My book agent was the one who said it to me, and she's been with me since the beginning. And I wasn't really thinking in those terms when I was writing the book, but as soon as she said it, I was like, oh, that feels right. Um, I think there's some commonalities with our main character having a kind of dissatisfaction in the quote unquote like stable relationship that she's in. That is something that both Ani and Faye have in common. And I think a little bit of their edginess, their prickliness, they have very specific perspective. And they oftentimes feel like how they present to the world is maybe very different than what's going on inside their heads. And they struggle with feeling safe and secure enough to show themselves for who they really are.
So, Helpless also sits at the intersection of a few different genres. What
Mhm.
was most exciting to you about writing a book that could be shelved in a few different places?
I think I wouldn't say it's exciting. I actually feel like it's my cross to bear as a writer that I can't really pick a genre. Um, I I remember when we were publishing Luckiest Girl Alive, and even when we were trying, part of it was turned into a film eventually, but there was always like a fear around the fact that like how do we market a book that like isn't just one thing, like we can't just say this is a thriller or psychological suspense or women's fiction. And that made me really self-conscious. I was like, maybe I would be better off if I could just like write something that like, fits into a neat box, but I've never been able to do that. I actually think it's hard. It would be harder for me to do that than to kind of play around and not just kind of like, I feel like I don't want to write myself into a corner is what happens. But I do always wonder from like the markability aspect. If I would have an easier time publishing, if I could just be a little bit more consistent. But thus far, I haven't been able, I just get bored. I can't stick to like one thing.
No, I totally understand that. And I think it's exciting. I think it's cool. So, getting into kind of the story of it, funeral is a really loaded place for
Mm.
Faye and Henry to re-enter each other's lives because everybody's already vulnerable and nostalgic and confronting time. I was curious if you always knew that their reunion would happen there, or if you considered another way back into their past at any point.
I did know it would happen at a funeral. I didn't always know whose funeral it would be, but I had started thinking about the two of them like probably well before I actually sat down and wrote the book. And I always wanted it to be a funeral where it would eventually come out that maybe there was more to that death than meets the eye, which is what happens in this book and is part of the mystery that they're unraveling. Um, the funeral being for their film professor was actually inspired by the death of my own writing professor from college, who passed away about a year before I started writing the book. And I don't know if you have a finished copy or not, but finished copy is dedicated to Professor Holly. Um, and I spent some time back on my college campus writing this book. And I it did feel really nostalgic for the past. I went to all my old haunts where I used to study and write, and there's a real history to the college that I went to. It's a very old college, and there's something about the campus that feels in a good way haunted. Like there's just a lot of history that has happened there. And my professor himself was the longest serving professor in the history of the college. So he had been there for decades. And his death really impacted the staff, the students, and he had really touched my life in a really special way. And so that kind of helped inform um, the kind of impetus for bringing Faye and Henry back together.
I'm so sorry for your loss. That sounds like he really left an impact on so many people's lives.
He did, yeah.
But one of the dynamics that I think feels super central to Helpless is the way that power can shift over time. And so when Faye was younger, Henry and the world around him seemed to have this kind of status and authority over her. But meeting her now, it seems as though she's built this power and success and status of her own. So I was curious what interested you about bringing these two people back together after that power imbalance has changed or shifted.
So exactly what you said, like a shifting power imbalance is like catnip to me. I just find that to be like one of the most interesting dynamics that you can have between two characters. And I think in this way, there's a little bit of mirroring of what happens in Luckiest Girl Alive with Ani, where when Faye was younger, she was a scholarship student at her college, surrounded by a lot of like kind of wealthy peers and introduced to a world she didn't really know existed. And so she was never really on equal footing with Henry, who was her boyfriend at the time. And after they break up, Faye goes on to kind of create her own success, very different from the kind of East Coast moneyed background that her ex-boyfriend has and that some of her peers had. But success kind of on her own terms. And also like Ani and Luckiest Girl Alive, she's kind of invited back to a space and into an environment where she was not on equal footing with these people. And now she is. And how does that play out, especially in a romantic relationship where their dynamic was predicated on the fact that Henry was kind of the one in charge. And there's a play with power and who has it. And even the title, Helpless, is in itself like tongue in cheek. Like, is Faye really helpless? Um, and I can't really answer that question without giving away the kind of big twist in the end. But it is really the central question of the novel.
The twist I definitely want to get to soon, but still kind of talking about that power and control. You've talked previously about how the idea Just there's this idea that fantasies of losing control can still be controlled by the person imagining them. With Faye, what happens when a fantasy of surrender collides with a reality where control has actually been taken away?
Mm-hmm. Um, so that's a hard question for me to answer because you used, well, see, I don't want to, I don't want to like spoil
You
anything.
can spoil
So
a little bit if
a little bit. Well, you
if
used the
it
word,
helps.
yeah. So you said it so well. So I am interested in this kind of, I don't want to say sudden, but recent popularity of, what we're now calling dark romance, where oftentimes there is intimate dynamic, sexual dynamic that is portrayed, where a woman is, control is taken away from a woman by a man that she also is attracted to. And that's potentially a very dangerous and sensitive thing to explore, but it appeals to a lot of female readers and it appeals to me. And my question was why, And so I wrote this book to really explore that. And the question Faye is asking throughout this novel is, what am I doing here? But the question I'm asking the reader at the end of the novel is, what are we doing here? Like, what are we doing here as a culture? And I fear that's all I can say without giving too much away.
You've shared a little bit on Instagram that this was a challenging book to write, or it seemed like this was a bit of a challenging book to write. What felt most important for you to get right about this story and these characters?
Yeah, well, every book is challenging for me to write, sadly. I wish it wasn't true. I wish I just loved writing every minute of every day and I was always in flow with it. But really, the only time that ever happened was with my debut novel. This one I think I underestimated how difficult sex is to write, and how how much of a skill set it takes. And I had never really written sex in detail before. So that required a lot of polishing, a lot of finessing, a lot of trial and error, because you get too close to the material sometimes and you can't tell what's good and what's not. So I really relied on my editor. I really relied on my book agent to tell me, like, this is working and this is why it's working. This, we don't know why this is not working, but it's not working. But like, look to the stuff that is working and kind of understanding how to create a build to certain scenes, um, which in some ways was a really good exercise and not all that different from creating a build to an explosive moment, of violence maybe that you would have in a typical thriller, which this is a thriller, but there is an erotic element to it as well, which is new for me.
Man, it's there's so many things that I want to talk to you about with this book, but um, going to the ending, and we're not giving too much away, but it does really ask readers to reconsider everything that came before it.
Mhm.
How early in your writing process did you know where the story was going?
I The whole story was written with this ending in mind. Like it was this idea that sparked the story that came before it, that this idea for this ending. Initially, it played out a little bit differently and it wasn't working, it wasn't landing. And my editor floated the idea of kind of scrapping um the the kind of the big twist, the rug being ripped out from underneath you moment. And I was like, no, I really, it just manifested in a different way. And I was like, no, I would not have written this story if this was not the ending. Like this ending is critical to the rest of the story and what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to work out for myself. So I sat on it, I thought about it, and I proposed this other idea, which was like a little shift to the right. And that is the ending that we have now. And thankfully, my editor was like, I love this, write it. Let's see if you can execute it. And everyone agreed that this one, that everyone agreed I landed the plane with this one enough that it could go into production. So that was nice to hear and a relief.
Yeah. You've shared some writing advice in the past that if you're running into a plot problem, the problem is probably not in that moment, but earlier. And I just thought that was really interesting. I was wondering if you had any other writing gems to share, especially because, the book process you said is challenging at times for you.
Mhm. Yeah. That was one I discovered in process about if you're running into a problem, the problem is probably not just getting that line right or just getting that scene right. Likely the problem is happening much earlier than that. And you have to be able to pinpoint where that is. That was something I discovered on one of my solo writing retreats working on this one. I Another thing that I'm always having to remind myself of, and I like to tell other people as well, is just because it feels hard and it feels like you're pulling teeth to um, get words on the page, it doesn't mean that it won't work one day. It doesn't mean that it's an idea that you should throw out the window. Um, it just means that you have to keep at it. And it's unfortunately um, part of my process, which is there are so many times where I will just say, I actually don't think this idea is working. I need to start over with something new, or I have to, flip the script totally and do something really major. Um, and oftentimes it's just a matter of sticking with it, going back, doing another draft, then another, then another. It's a very tedious process. But to sum it up, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not good or it's not working.
I love that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Well, so I think I had told you before, I absolutely binged this book. Like I read it in one sitting. Nobody could talk to me. I was like, I need to finish this right now. And I also feel like it's the perfect book club book. So I was curious if you could finish this sentence. Helpless is for readers who love books that make them feel blank.
Helpless is a book for readers that makes them feel hmm, energized. Like,
Mm.
I want you to turn the last page of this book and be like, I feel rejuvenated. Like, I need to talk to someone about this. Like, I'm activated. That is my favorite feeling when something is so good that I feel energized by it. Like good writing, good television, a good movie, like anything creative like that, that like kind of like fills my own tank. I'm like, oh, like that is, and it's hard to come by. So if I can give readers that feeling, like they've read something that has like really amped something in them, I would be really happy.
Well, this definitely did that for me. I just yeah, I can't tell you enough that I just really enjoyed this book. It was so thought-provoking and I feel like even before we started talking, I was like, I have like figuring out what I wanted to talk to you about. I could not even wrap my mind around it all. There were so many little pieces. So I really appreciate this inside insight as well. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about this book or just say to readers who are picking it up? Time?
We had said before we started recording, when you told me that read it so quickly, I was like, oh, that's all I want to hear. Really, I worked really hard on this one to keep the plot really tight, and it's actually my most slender novel to date. I believe it's like 82,000 words, and for comparison, Luckiest Girl Alive is like 105,000 words. And it's actually a skill set that I I'm really working on, which is brevity. And I think it's harder to tell something that is more concise and shorter and tighter than it is to take up more real estate. So it's something I'm working on in my writing, and I'm proud. I'm proud of Nice little slender fourth baby.
I love that. Are you working on anything you can tease right now?
Playing around with a new book idea. And yes, there will be some some exciting news, hopefully, that I can talk about soon. Going on behind the scenes with this one and with one of my other books too. So it's a lot of fun stuff under wraps that's like slow moving. But I look forward to the day I can speak about it publicly.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to reading whatever you're writing next.
Thank you so much.